Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our conversations through our study of the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now in very brief comments to the next poem of some 13 sections, Salut Au Monde. We'll talk about the French title here and why Whitman likes to use French. Some have argued the language of brotherhood, fraternity, this salute to the world, this salute to all things in the world. It's going to be one of the more successful poems of Leaves of Grass. Certainly right here we're going to find why Whitman is considered the world's poet, not just America's poet. Now our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt is what we are calling our collection of talks here. And my hope is that you've been following us all the way up and including through the inscriptions work and up to include the Calamus section, which we've just finished. I've also given a real brief set of comments on the way in which Whitman himself wanted to embrace this idea that his Leaves of Grass was going to be some kind of a new biblical text, the New American Bible. And he wrote about this in his journals a couple of times. Now, how seriously we take this as legitimate versus some kind of, conceit or some kind of idea of what Leaves of Grass would become for Whitman is hard to say. But we certainly like to think about this next section, starting now with Salut Au Monde, to the book of Psalms from the 1611 King James Version of the Bible. Now, let's hear first of all from our Nortons what some background information for this poem is. We began the third poem of the second edition of Leaves of Grass, 1856, under the title Poem of Salutation. This poem took its present title in 1860. In his 1855 preface, Whitman had said of the American bard that, quote, "To him the other continents arrive as contributions," end quote. And so early in the development of Leaves of Grass, he undertook to express a world vision. I would write that down. A world vision. Quote, "Within me latitude widens, longitude lengthens." We'll read this set of lines in the poem, which tempered and balanced his nationalism. So we've got a very interesting poet in Whitman. Nationalistic, very patriotic, and yet at the same time, very much an admirer of the world. Now, to continue with Norton's, his revisions are fairly constant, but preserve the general proportion. Notably, he added in 1860 the effective salutation of the closing four lines, and for the final 1881 version, he removed with discrimination quite a number of lines that were descriptive of the United States, so limiting his point of view outward from America to other lands. So, in some ways, Norton's will finish, Whitman, in composing this poem, was much influenced by his reading of Volney's Ruins, another set of lines. And one of the things we've said about Whitman in our earlier lectures is just what an amazing reader he was, and the way in which he just kind of took into himself so many different kinds of ideas. Now, just to continue with a little bit of background information, as we said, we got the present title in 1860. There were some different kinds of revisions through the different editions of Leaves of Grass. Whitman would drop the American genre painting scene of section 8 from the 13 sections in 1881, and he reprinted that as a separate poem, A Paumanok Picture. He may have begun work on this poem before 1855. There are some fragments in his notebooks that seem to suggest as much. James E. Miller has suggested that this section he calls the song section. We're calling it the psalm section, beginning with this poem, continuing with obviously Song of the Open Road, the poem to follow, and Song of the Rolling Earth, and all the other songs that are going to be a part of this section. In many ways, this kind of poem is going to take us back to other things we've said about the unbelievable optimism of Whitman, right? And as well, what he would say about his desire of, quote, internationality of poems and poets, binding the lands of the earth closer than all treaties and diplomacy, end quote, a line that he wrote in some of his prose work. And here we're going to find that the poem is going to capture everything. His view of religion, his view of sexuality. Obviously, we messed around with that in previous discussions. Politics, art, the whole thing. And speaking of art, notice in this set of lines that we're going to see Whitman as not just the bard of America, but the bard of a new world, right? In which he says it this way, quote, "The continents arrive as contributions." This coming from that preface of 1855. There's this hope for some kind of international solidarity that will be a part of this. And as we've commented already, Salut Au Monde, that is to say salute to the world, is his use of the French language. We're going to see this a number of times in Leaves of Grass, ensemble, en masse, rapport, mélange. He loved to do this kind of thing. I think what it did as well is it showed that he was willing to include both the old world as well as the obviously increasing new world. Now, how are we going to address our study of Salut Au Monde? Well, first of all, we are going to work one section at a time. It makes more sense to do it that way. They're numbered as 13, so we'll give one set of comments for each one of the sections, and that will obviously allow for us to not have such long talks about the entire poem, right? The other thing I'm going to recommend, and this is a really fun thing. I mean, I said in earlier lectures, pick up Leaves of Grass, make sure you have your dictionary there with you, because Whitman is a great lover of words, and he loves to use these words in different ways. Now I'm going to recommend that you have your atlas, or of course your Google, referencing right there with you. It will blow your mind that in 1860 we have a poem that will reference so many specific parts of the world. Now, a lot has been made by scholars of the way this poem is at one point going to be very focused and very specific, and then at other times it's going to have this just unbelievable, huge, expansive kind of feel to it. But when he starts talking about all the different places on the planet, obviously one of the immediate questions is, heaven's name, he never traveled to any of these places. So how, I mean, he's going to mention Timbuktu, he's going to mention all these different places, so it's going to be kind of stunning that he has this level of interest. I recommend that you have right next to you an atlas, and anytime there's a mention of a term or a place or a locale, you might want to Google image it really fast, get a couple of pictures in your mind's eye of what it is that he's referencing. Some people have said that reading this poem is like looking at a globe when you were very young. Do you guys remember that? When you were really young and you looked at that globe and it's so beautiful, all that blue obviously for the oceans, and you'd spin it. You remember this feeling as a child? You'll have the same feeling. If you capture it, you'll have the same feeling when you're reading this kind of a poem. So I think it'll be helpful for you in that regards. Whitman wants you to travel. He wants us all to travel with him. So again, we're doing this A Foot in Lighthearted. I Take to the Open Road as the opening lines of Song of the Open Road. We're going to play that game. Now, I think that we read a poem like this, drawing on all of our previous reading, no question. But we read a poem like this to get ready for something like Passage to India, a poem that we will see later, which is going to be as well a great celebration of all things international. We're going to hear and reference many of the echoes. Now, hey guys, I've said this before. I will fight that tendency to say, hey guys, do you remember? Hey guys, do you remember? We're going to see it over and over again. But we're going to hear lots and lots of echoes, certainly from Song of Myself, no question, as we get into this poem. We're also going to look for some of the controversies. I mean, Whitman has been qualified from the study of this poem as both xenophobic as well as racist, and we're going to talk about maybe why we see it that way. So come with me now. Let's turn to section 1, and let's enjoy our study of Salut Au Monde. Thank you.